Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Welcome to the new school at Commonweal. So glad you're here in Hummingbird Meadow in this beautiful tent here. I'm here with Joanna Bornowski. Joanna, welcome.
Thank you.
So glad you're here with us. And just a brief description of Joanna. Joanna is an intuitive guide, teacher, and animal communicator specializing in horses, though very able to communicate with other animals as well. She's the eldest daughter of two artists from Portland, Oregon. She has spent most of her life either in the art studio or in the saddle. Art has given Joanna the unique perspective of opening her mind to the creative process and allowing inspiration to guide her throughout her life. This guidance has and continues to support a cultivation and interest in deeper states of awareness, connection to the divine, and communication with the natural world. Joanna now speaks with over 400 horses a year and is fascinated by how these vibrant animals offer equestrians an opportunity to explore their own consciousness and connectivity to the natural world. So Joanna, it's so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
We thought we might start with you just doing a little practice with us just to get us in the right space.
Yes. Okay. So if everybody can just close their eyes and put your feet flat on the floor. And then take a couple deep breaths, just breathing into your belly, breathing into the sides of your rib cage. And imagining and being aware of the sense of your own energy in your body. Dropping it down into your body and shifting it to the back of your body. Opening your shoulders up and lifting your chest. Engaging the belly ever so slightly. And breathing out and down through the arms, through the spine, and into your feet. And when you're ready, take another couple deep breaths and come back.
Beautiful, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Joanna, where to start? We have so many connections, but let's start with how we met. We met through a mutual friend who you worked with called Lynn Getz.
Yes.
Lynn was a healer, a psychic. She had a studio. You worked with her in her studio in Portland,
Yes.
which I visited. She worked with, flower essences, color essences, and stones, right?
Yes.
Were those her main methods?
Yes, she was very intuitive, just generally speaking, but she worked with a lot of the color and the essences in particular, and then stones, kind of on the side, but to support consciousness.
And she had this beautiful studio with these little bottles of essences, which I still have a couple of, that had colors and flowers. And I did, I think, 2 New School conversations with her. And she became a close friend. She died tragically, about a decade ago or a little less?
2018.
2018.
Yeah.
How can you best introduce your work to us as an animal communicator? You work with 400 horses a year. What does it look like when you work with a horse?
Most of my time is spent on the phone. So I use a meditation method. It's heart-based to connect with the animal. And then we have a conversation. It unfolds. Mostly the conversation is through images and sensations. So I'm sending images and sensations as questions and receiving the reply that way. There's a sense of knowing, so the personality of the horse will come through their method of delivery, their cadence, the emotions behind it, but also as they introduce themselves to me, they kind of share. It's an opening. And then the human has many questions for their animal, and I become a translator. Sometimes I help with how the questions are asked or how messages are delivered, but my main role during the conversation is really to support connection between horse and rider and clear communication. So whatever the horse is sharing, I share with the human. Whatever the human is sharing, I share with the horse. And my intention is to be as clear and clean as possible during that process. I don't sugarcoat things, so the way the horse says it, I say it to the person. It's not always comfortable to hear, but that's part of true communication, is really expressing all of the elements.
Does a particular horse and equestrian come to mind that you could describe what the conversation was like?
I think
Is it better to go at it another way?
Animals are fascinating in that they are really perceptive, and they can be very aware of their surroundings in ways that we don't anticipate. So often if you are thinking about saying something but you don't actually say it, if you're thinking about a transition, if you're thinking about what may happen, you are sending these images and sensation through your own field. So we are all doing this type of communication, and the animal is capable and able to see those pictures and sensations in your field. And they learn how to adjust and interpret and have questions about those things, but also will decide how to support their human in different ways, or how to communicate their needs in different ways, either through physical actions or through other things happening in their life. So I don't have a particular one, but I hope that gives
that gives me a good sense. So when did you discover that you had this ability, not just with horses and animals, but what is, I mentioned to you, I conduct these conversations as spiritual biographies. So my question is, do you remember when you first became aware that you had perceptions that went beyond what people normally think of?
I was 4 or 5, and I was at my godmother's house. I was sitting outside with the neighbor's dog, and I looked, little white terrier of some type, and I looked at the dog who was sitting on the bench next to me, and I said, "I'd like to pet you." And the dog said, "Don't pet me, I will bite you." Mm. And I went, okay, I'm gonna pet the dog anyway. And I went to pet the dog, and the dog bit me right under my eye. I had to go to the emergency room, and my mom asked me what happened. And I said, well, I told the dog I was going to pet it, and the dog told me no, and I pet it anyway. And she immediately, not in an intentional way, but she reframed it for me as, oh, the dog growled at you. And I said, yeah, I'm fairly sure that happened. But it was a very subtle shift in my perception that this isn't something people understand. And I turned it off for a few years. I was around 10 or 11 years old, and I was riding at a stables at that time, and I walked into the aisleway, and this horse was tied, and there was a chiropractor, an older gentleman, working on the horse, and his daughter was sitting in the aisleway, and she was probably 7 or 8, and she's telling him, no, Dad, not like that. Move your hand lower down. And I'm 10, and I'm looking at her tell him how to do his job. And I was like, what is happening right here? I went up to my trainer, and she told me, well, she can talk to animals. And I went, oh, I want that. I want that. And, but I had very thoroughly closed myself off at that point. And over the years, kind of held that desire or inclination and belief that was available to me kind of quietly. I studied a lot of alternative methods and consciousness in high school and college. And then I met Lynn
Lynn Getz,
Lynn
our
Getz,
friend.
yeah, in 2011, and she immediately saw how much I wanted the world of consciousness. I wanted to be more in it, have more access to my intuition again, and so she very quickly opened me up again.
So how did Lynn Getz open you up?
Through conversations and the color therapy bottles and essential oils. Also, Kira and I talked about, I don't know if Kira is, she mentioned this earlier, that she has a little practice, but we pulled tarot cards every morning and would read them intuitively before looking at them in the book or diving deeper into concepts. And because she was so intuitive and so immersed in that world, it was also partly through osmosis. And yeah, I got to be I was her assistant and her trainee or her mentee, and just soaked up as much as I could.
We're both happened today, just by accident, to be wearing pendants that Lynn gave us. And they, you can see them. Some of you can see them. And on the reverse side are these Virgin Marys from an amazing woman, a shaman, really, basically, in New Mexico, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I wear this a great deal of the time, and somehow we both wore them today. The way I came to mind was I was walking on the cliff here with Lynn, and I noticed her pendant, and I said, that's incredibly beautiful, and she just took it off her neck and gave it to me. Yeah. So I had a very deep connection with Lynn, and I'm most grateful for it. So that's how she helped you open to this. Mm-hmm. So how did then your practice of doing this evolve? How did you come to where you are today?
Well, it was through friends first, just working with friends, animals, friends, horses in particular. My whole desire from the very beginning was working with horses. When I was a child and riding, and after I'd seen that little girl talk to her dad, my first thought was, oh my gosh, if I could tell my pony to just stop bucking, then we would win the classes that I was supposed to win. And so it was this, it's a 10-year-old's mind of like, maybe if I can communicate differently. And it really evolved during that time of this, like, listening to nature and listening to the natural world, listening to the waterfalls and the trees and the ground. But I worked with friends' horses and really fell in love with the capacity that horses have to communicate. And all of the natural world has a vast capacity to communicate with us. But I really appreciate the intensity of the connection with horses. As a rider, you are constantly feeling the motions and the emotions and the awareness of the horse. And to take it deeper in being able to not only receive but send and be aware of the process that's ongoing was fascinating for me. There's also an element of danger because there's a trust here with this animal that they will take you over the jump or make sure you're safe on the trail or whatever. So the capacity for horses and riders to communicate already with what is happening during the ride is deepened. And because of that, we also train the horses to listen very well. So their capacity to have a long conversation is also really lovely. So all animals can really have a long conversation, but because of the training in presence that we require during the ride, they already have a set of like, oh, I can do this. I can focus for 45 minutes. I can focus for, an hour. Whereas some animals, when you're talking to them, a cat or a dog, they may just leave. They may just go to a different conversation because they're no longer focused. You can get them back, but so I started working with friends' horses and learning about this and some cats and dogs and just really fell in love with how horses are. And after Lynn passed away, I returned to the mortgage world, and it was soul-crushing for me. It provided safety.
I remember that. I remember you going back to it. Because we stayed in touch after Lynn's death.
Right.
Yeah.
And I decided to quit. After a while, I found my strength, and I had actually gone.
You worked as a mortgage broker, right? For a while. Yeah, right.
the vastness of those two worlds.
Right.
One of my friends in Seattle, who I grew up riding with, called me, and she said, I want you to come up to Seattle and work with some of the horses in the barn. And at that point, I was working with essential oils and horses. And that was it for the public. Essential oils and horses. I wasn't offering communication. And her name is Hannah. And I said, Hannah, what did you tell them? And she said, oh, your work with essential oils. And I went, oh, okay, I can do that. So we set a date. I packed up everything. I asked people for a photo and a name of their horse so I could pick some essences intuitively, and then we could hone them in when I got there. And these people started emailing me, sending me their Venmo payments and emailing me. And the subjects of the emails was conversations with such and such, or talking to this horse. And I called Hannah and I was like, Hannah, did you tell them I'd be talking to their horses? And she's like, oh yeah, oh yeah. And I'm like, I can't refund the money that's already been sent to me. I have this, it's already happening. So I decided it was a really lovely push in the right direction, and I showed up. And to this day, it's one of my very favorite in-person visits that I've done. There were so many spaces of opening and understanding with people's horses, and I credit a lot of my work to that day of like, okay, you're doing this now. Yeah, and that's how it, and then I went to a horse show, and down in Southern California at Thermal, and just kind of talked about my practice to people, and within 2 months it was full, and I quit the part-time jobs and I landed here.
There you go. Amazing. So, in addition to your work with horses and your ability to work with other animals, so do you get requests to work with other animals?
I do. I worked with other animals for some time, but like the intensity of the horse and rider relationship is really what I'm most interested in.
I get
and
it. But you also mentioned that you can contact animals that have died. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So what is there a difference between working with an animal that is in this world and an animal that has passed?
Yes. Animals are so much closer to spirit than we are. So a lot of the communication is both personality and both spirit while they're in body. Contacting a horse or an animal who has passed there is a part of that personality that's connected to the spirit, but it's really quite based in spirit. So spirit's perspective is 50,000 feet. They can see things very differently, and they often communicate more in symbolic and metaphor like terms rather than literal. You can get them to talk about their life with their human while they were embodied, and that can be literal, but the layer of messaging is so much more depthful than having a conversation with an animal who's and for me, I'm really, when I'm doing my work, I'm really focused on the personality of the horse and what they are experiencing in body, so that the human can then go, oh, this is how I'm responding or behaving, or this is the setup that I've given you, and be able to change those things accordingly, so the body and the personality of the horse is more comfortable, or their communication is more clear. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
That makes perfect sense. So we also talked briefly before we began this conversation about your work as a psychic with humans, and that you've been studying in various schools and so forth, psychic work. Could you talk a little about that?
Sure. So I have been working with the Clarity School, and Shannon Swallow is the founder, and she is she's right outside of San Diego, and I can't remember the actual city. Mm-hmm. But she has a beautiful school. Her lineage is through the Berkeley School, this Berkeley Psychic School, I think it is. But I've been taking classes and psychic training for 4 or 5 years now, and will continue to do so. It is a life-changing practice of being able to look at yourself. So the first part or the foundation of the psychic work is really to see what you don't want to see about yourself and open that up, and having the tools, the energy tools, to clear what needs to be cleared or support what needs to be supported and healed. So I do psychic readings for humans as well, although my focus is really the horse communication. But recently, I've started working with a family who has a child who is 5 or 6 years old, and she is a nonverbal autistic child. And so being able to use both the communication skills and the psychic skills in order to facilitate conversation with her and her parents has been really beautiful to unfold.
So, specifically with that child, what kinds of conversations has that enabled between the parent and the child?
Likes and dislikes, comfort level, body awareness, where to look for pain or what to support. But on a very foundational level, being able to communicate love or awareness or connection in ways that look very different for the child because of her autism.
Mm-hmm. You've also done a considerable amount of work with psychedelics, and specifically ayahuasca, I understand. How does that thread fit with these other threads?
The way that I see psychedelics is that it is an opportunity, again, to see truth, to become aware of the foundation of truth. It is a very powerful method for connecting to the natural world, to experience unity consciousness, to hold new levels of love, and to hold new levels of awarenesses of yourself. And the gift of what you're given in those sessions is beautiful and complicated and sometimes difficult, and most often life-changing. And the ceremonies themselves are incredible, but the work really comes after the ceremony, in the integration, being able to take the information that you've received and work with it, using it as kind of a support for shifting yourself into that place of connection with the natural world, with the divine, with awareness, with your own consciousness. Being able to hold the space or hold that quality of frequency and vibration and take it into your daily life, I think, is really the point. I do think that people miss the point, which is it doesn't fix you. Psychedelics experiences don't. And let me. So I know that there is some research going on with mushrooms and the brain and trauma and PTSD and MDMA and all kinds of iboga, different psychedelics that do actually change the chemistry of your brain and can support physical changes. I am mostly interested in spiritual awareness. And although these changes can take place and although the awarenesses can be presented, it's really up to the participant to do the work afterwards. It's not a pill, it's not a fixer, but it does provide an opportunity for you to change. And that is one of the biggest things that Lynn also brought to me, was the opportunity to pause right before a behavior or a thought or an event or whatever. There's an opportunity to decide through intention and awareness who you want to be, what you want to represent, what your path is like. And in order to see that pause, we have to be really present. And in these experiences, you get a chance to be very present. And so that presence starts this seed of awareness that you can cultivate. You can also go back and try it again, but to leave it only up to the medicine, I think, is doing yourself and this planet a disservice. And really being able to cultivate it within yourself, use the gifts, use the opportunities that you've been given, and cultivate that awareness or sense of self is what I think they should be used for or worked with through.
So, from this combination of starting at age 4 with the experience with the dog, and then closing it off at age closing it off, and then experiencing at 10 the girl your age who was showing her father, the veterinarian, how to do his work, and then wishing you could have that, and then going along until you meet Lynn, and she opens this up for you again. And through a combination of the work with the essences and the colors and the tarot readings together, and you just are opened. And then Lynn's daughter, we haven't mentioned, was an equestrian, and so she was spending a lot of time around horses, and you were Lynn's assistant, so you were part of that. By the way, were you riding yourself during that period? Okay. So that led finally, after this bardo with the mortgage industry, to your work and being full up, and the distinction between working with horses and working with other animals, and also the distinction between working with horses that are alive and present and horses that have passed, and how they've moved towards spirit but still retain elements of personality. So that's where we are so far. And then you brought into that the power of your psychedelic work and the power of your psychic work. So have you developed a kind of informal metaphysics about how these things fit together? In other words, we're both interested in consciousness, right? So when I began to ask you about this before we came on, you said we extend far beyond these physical bodies. But how has the work with psychedelics informed the psychic work and the work with animals?
I love this question. I think one of the greatest sufferings that we experience as humans is the illusion that we are separate from the natural world. And that creates quite a problem for us. Psychedelic medicine really shows it, that you're part of something greater. You are divine. You hold your own divinity, and it is working with the divine that surrounds you. And in that interaction And in the psychedelic work, you can physically see your aura or energy moving. In the psychic work, what we're working with is the energetic body, the field, the electromagnetic field, or your consciousness or your spirit. They're all the same. And the depth of which your awareness to what is in your field affects you. And that field is intimately connected with the earth and the natural world. The way that I understand it is that we have our chakra centers and we have our aura, but the aura really doesn't stop extending. And because we are all connected to the earth, and because we all have this field, we are weaving with each other. And that weaving or that connection is what provides the highway system for animal communication to work, in my opinion. It's space. This space is not empty. It is full. And just like when you put salt and water and run two wires on the opposite ends, you can light a light bulb. This space is full of information and light, and it lends itself to connection. It gives us that space of unity or oneness. My business is called The Wild Thread because that's what I feel like it is. It's this thread of connection that cannot be altered, and it's not going to be tamed. As soon as you are in your left linear brain and you're in effort or logic or thinking, you have pulled yourself out of the wild thread, the thread that really relies on that creative spark. It's not that it goes anywhere. Your attention just shifts out of it. And being in your physical body, being present with your body, taking those deep breaths, pulling your energy back, setting it down into the back of your spine, down into your seat, allows you to get out of this pushing, kind of grabbing, doing energy that is so cultivated in our culture, and sit back and be able to observe from a place of neutrality and be able to really find that sense of sensation and emotion, and through that, these beautiful connections that exist, and that you can guide your energy to connect with one thing or many things. This was actually years ago, and I used just that simple exercise of taking a breath, get quiet, get in your back, observe. And I connected with a waterfall. And in my human mind, I had spent the day like kind of weaving on the trail through people, and there were people all over this waterfall, and I'm like, they're disturbing the natural world. They're yelling, I had all of these judgments. And the waterfall, connecting to it, I was like, what do you think? How do you feel about this? And it showed me a picture of a flower, this really beautiful flower. And all of these bees coming to the flower, taking the pollen, taking the nectar, and flying out. And it was this gorgeous shift of like, no, it wants the humans here because they take a little piece of this pollen or nectar and they take it out into the rest of the world. And I think just like a simple awareness of my own judgment and being able to see the connection that is there, the perspective of this waterfall, and shift and go, okay, there's nothing really wrong here. It's beautiful how it unfolds. And that's something that's so wild about the natural world is that it is chaos and perfectly timed, aligned, divinely guided chaos. And you can't tame that. You can't make it happen. And we're all connected to it. We're all part of this thread that weaves. And in these interconnections, your actions affect everybody else, and their actions affect you. And as you get more aware and aligned within yourself, your thread, your awareness of that thread becomes more and more clear, and you get to be a support rather than a hindrance. And it's beautiful to be part of that wild guidance.
Just before we came on, we were sitting in my office, and I said, shall we walk down? You said yes, and you took out this little vial of tincture and got a thing and squirted it in your mouth, and I said, what's that? And you said, it's dogwood. Would you like some? And so I said, yeah. I said, what does it do? And you said, what does it do?
It supports intuition.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think you said it connects you to the third eye, right?
Right,
Yeah.
yes.
So I took a little toke of dogwood essence, and I'll tell you, it really altered my perspective. And so I'm operating from a somewhat, I work with these essences some, but I hadn't tried dogwood before, so it's an interesting experience. So I mentioned this to you before, that I've been particularly interested in this conversation with you because a real focus of my work, literally for 50 years, but more intensively as I move into my 9th decade, is the connection between consciousness and healing. And particularly consciousness and healing in this chaotic world that we're living in right now. Because the original vision that I had of Commonweal was as a center for healing ourselves and healing the earth. Mm-hmm. That was the vision. And so I've stayed with that vision for 50 years. I started work on Commonweal 50 years ago in 2025. But my understanding of both healing and consciousness has been in constant evolution for 50 years. So about less than a year ago, my core work has been with people with cancer. I've done 225 or 4 week-long retreats for cancer patients. And when I started that work, I was completely agnostic about what happens after death. I didn't know. I was open. I'd heard the stories. I certainly believed in the possibility of reincarnation. But I've been either gifted or afflicted with a combination of great openness of mind, but also very strong critical judgment. Not in the negative sense of critical, but as a friend of mine once said, Michael is open-minded, but not so open-minded that his brain has fallen out. So there's this. So I thought, okay, so I was kind of at the 50-50 mark when I started, and over the last, 34 years, 35 years, I'm sorry, it's almost 40 years of doing the Cancer Help Program. That dial went from 50-50 to 60-40 to now it was last year it was at like 90-10 or 95-5. Then walking in Fairfax, I saw a book on the sale thing of this little bookstore. The title was Children Who Remember Past Lives. And it was by a man named Tucker. And I picked it up and I realized, this is the guy who replaced Ian Stevenson at the University of North Carolina, because Ian Stevenson, whose work I knew about, had started a database of children who remembered past lives. And Ian Stevenson had over 3,000 kids in this database, and their methodology was totally impeccable. That is, that they particularly went to countries that believed in reincarnation, and they had scouts, and these scouts would identify families where a child remembered a past life, and then they would send out a team, and they were absolutely neutral. They would meticulously record what the child said about his past life, and in a case that was solved, the family had found the previous birth family, and they'd go there and they'd meticulously match what the first child said about the past life with what the family of the previous birth had done.
Wow.
And they had 3,500 of these, and Tucker was the guy who took this work over after Ian Stevenson died. Well, I had been around these issues for 50 years, all right, at least 50 years. But my rigor had not permitted me to go to the place of acceptance of reincarnation until I knew about Stevenson's work, but it was only when I read this book, you know, when the student is ready, the teacher shows up, right? So finally, at the age of 80, I was ready, you know? And so I thought, okay, I don't know that everybody reincarnates. I don't know that. I still don't know that. But I know these children reincarnated. I know that for a fact. And if they reincarnated, what about the whole freaking literature on reincarnation? You know, what about all the stories of it? And so what happened was there was a shift. There was what some people call a flip from a view. Actually, it was the equivalent of a psychedelic flip, but I did it without drugs because I haven't used psychedelics for 40 years. You know, I used them 40 years ago, briefly, you know, 3 or 4 times, but I haven't been called to psychedelics. So what I then began to understand was that if reincarnation is real, what about intuition? What about telepathy? What about clairvoyance? What about clairaudience? What about remote viewing? What about moving forward and backward in time? All of these things. So here I was sitting with this, and what actually had happened to prime it was maybe 6 months earlier when my wife Charlotte and I were up at our second home in Langley on Whidbey Island, and I was talking to a polymathic genius named Stefan Schwartz, and Stefan, who studied consciousness for 50 years intensively and publishes in 7 different disciplines, was sitting on our little sun porch with me, and he said, well, of course, people don't understand anything about the universe if they don't understand that consciousness is primary. Well, I thought, what an interesting thought. And so I began to dive into that in more depth, and I came upon the field of philosophy of mind, which I knew something about, but there is in philosophy of mind a term called panpsychism. And panpsychism is actually a meta-theory for about 20 different theories, but what they have in common is that consciousness is not, as material science believes to its core, just an excrudescence, an epiphenomenon of the human brain. In other words, it isn't that evolution was random, it doesn't mean anything, we just all bubbled up from the muck, and lo and behold, our brains turned out to be functional, and so we developed a consciousness, and it all can be understood in an entirely material form. That is the position of materialist science, which is the dominant paradigm to this day, right? And panpsychism, on the other hand, if you look at the Wikipedia entry, which is brilliant, goes back to the animism of indigenous peoples. It goes back to the pre-Socratics like Thales. It goes back to Pythagoras. It goes back to Plato. It goes back to the Neoplatonics. It moves upward through Leibniz and Huxley to Russell and James and the others. The default view, according to Wikipedia, of consciousness in the 19th century William James held it, Russell held it, was that consciousness was ubiquitous. We've held that as a species for thousands of years. And then along comes materialist science, and it wipes it all out. It says that's all hooey, basically. And it says the only reality is the material world, you know? So I've lived my life on frontiers of knowledge. I've taken great risks to leave teaching at Yale, start a school for troubled kids, then start Commonweal. I'm just born for frontiers. And so I realized that I've been given the gift of still being alive in my 80s in search of what I believe is the next great scientific revolution, to use Thomas Kuhn's phrase. I believe we are moving from a materialist paradigm of science and consciousness back into a panpsychic paradigm. So what that means to me is that all these phenomena that you're talking about are in some very real sense real, depending on what we mean by real, okay? But they are in some sense real. They are also, as you pointed out, enormously complex, wild, the wild thread. You step out of your linear mind. You go into this incredible shifting diversity. So how can we understand something? Because there are so many theories of it, right? There are so many metaphysics. There's not a single metaphysic. Who do we listen to? You take the channeled teachings, you know, the Seth speaks, the Seth materials. That's just one. Or you take Course in Miracles, another channeled teaching, or Rudolf Steiner's teaching, or Edgar Casey's teaching. There are all these teachings. Perhaps they have some things in common, but there's this immense diversity, right? So, and then we look at the fact, why are we coming back into a panpsychic consciousness? We're living in the global polycrisis. The world is collapsing around us. We're destroying the gift of the creation. We're destroying the natural world. Is it even remotely possible that a transformation of human consciousness might offer us a way out of this? I'm not at all sure that it is. It's possible because, on the other hand, every new development in science or consciousness has been weaponized and used for evil purposes or dark purposes. So I'm not somebody who's going to say this will fix things, right? But at the same time, and it could take us even further into darker directions, because if we do figure out how this works in some way that we can, quote, manipulate, then you can bet that the intelligence agencies and the defense departments of the world, they actually already are involved in those studies, and they will just deepen them. So we have this gene that if we can know something, we might use it for its highest purposes, but we will undoubtedly use it for its darkest purpose. So anyway, I wanted to introduce this perspective because what made me want to talk to you is that your work with animal communication, your work as a psychic, your work with psychedelics, you are part of a generation which is exploring this at a depth that my generation never took it to, right? So you are a manifestation, just one of many, but, and of course many in my generation and past generations, because it was the default theory of consciousness for a really long time. So it's been around, but it's been obscured by materialist science. So anyway, I'm going to stop there for a moment and just say to you, how do you you've heard my little rap. What do you make of that as you integrate those thoughts with your own understanding?
I have a few different thoughts on
Yes.
this. First, we are part of the natural world, and we are part of this chaos. And we don't necessarily know what's good and bad until it evolves. And then, even then, that good thing or bad thing, whatever judgment we're putting on it, can shift. There is the perspective of karma and dharma of this reincarnation, that Earth is this school, is this place for consciousness to come and learn about itself in the expanse of consciousness, to have duality so that you can see both the light and the dark, so you can experience this availability of options that we have as humans. And I think that if we only take the human perspective and the perspective from right now, we can name some of the things that we're seeing as negative or positive. And I would agree. I think we are destroying this planet. I think that there are wars going on that don't need to happen. I think that, some thoughts that run through my head on a day-to-day basis is why do we have borders? Why don't we have one language? There are many things to consider. And what gives me a little bit of peace is that I don't have the full perspective. I can't actually make a judgment on something, on whether it's good or bad, because I only have this perspective. And even if I get into the psychic space or the psychedelic space and I pull back and I have the observer, that's still my perspective. It's still coming through this body. And I think that if I were to have a strictly spirit perspective, I wouldn't be in body. I would be spirit. And so I can't know. I can't ultimately know. I don't think the human mind is designed to know that. I think, in my perspective, that we are here to experience difficulty, experience love, experience greatness, and to evolve in some ways. And is that an expanse of consciousness? I would say yes, expand the consciousness, learn about the self. But not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody came to Earth to expand and to grow. Not everybody came to Earth because they want more from themselves. Some people are happy, and the spirit is happy just to be here and observe and see change happening around them while they stay kind of the same. So we have all of these places of knowledge, of wisdom, of information encoded in light. I was just listening to someone talk about how they took a tome like it wasn't this, and I'm getting part of this wrong, but you'll get the idea. They took like the Kabbalah and they imprinted on a strand of DNA to see if it would hold that information, and then they pulled it off. So light is full of information, and all of the things that show up are really just these awarenesses of ourselves, of opportunities for us to become more aware of ourselves and make different decisions. we are only ever interacting with ourselves, only. And as much as we can lean towards truth, and as much as we can move towards truth and get to the kernel, there's always something underneath that. And that's what makes this universe such an incredible place, is that it's always growing and expanding, right? The solar system is growing, always. So why would we not attribute that to ourselves as well, and to this planet as well? And who knows, we may need to wipe ourselves out in order for this to start over again. Things may need to crumble so that creation can happen again. Maybe that's the best way, and maybe we need to do it for suffering, because we haven't learned through the lifetimes that we've been here that suffering is what causes this. And I think the only thing that we can actually do is work on ourselves, because that's all we're interacting with anyway.
That's really beautiful. I agree with you. I am very fond of the teaching that the cosmos is the fundamental reality, and that it is alive, and it moves with a certain force and direction, and that this is true whether we understand it or not, and that if you do understand it, the best thing to do is to align yourself with it, right? So what you just said to me is, for me, I am deeply in accord. We cannot know. I mean, we have a human set of attachments to our species, to our families, to ourselves. And so we'd like to rearrange things so that we do better. But who knows? Who knows what the intention or purpose of the universe is? I mean, perhaps we'll eradicate. Perhaps we're a transitional species. Perhaps a new species will come. You've talked a lot about the connection to the earth, but you're also suggesting, and I believe, that not only the earth, but the cosmos, just, if panpsychism is real, which it appears to be, the cosmos just filled with intelligences, and incarnate and disincarnate, which of course original peoples believed, and all the great mystics have believed in one way or another. But we are very limited in our ability to figure it out. There was a mathematician named Haldane who said the universe is not only stranger than we know, it is stranger than we can know, So that sense that we are surrounded by mystery, just surrounded, and that mystery is in us. And to me, because of my work with people with cancer and other health issues, including just aging and everything else, your child with autism, the beauty of understanding that reality is panpsychic is that the sources of healing and growth that you can call on are not all intrapsychic. They're not all within yourself, If you open yourself up to the potential for healing, it can be very profound, including, of course, in the face of the great suffering that goes with illness and that just goes with life, right? So I'm going to open it to our guests here for their comments in a minute. But before we do that, and I'll come back to you at the end, is there anything else you'd like to say now before we just open it for other reflections?
Yes. I have a friend, and one of the comments that she makes is she'll talk about a snag or an issue that she's facing and how she's thinking about it. And she'll make a remark of, she'll tell herself to stop being so human. And I think with spiritual work and work around consciousness, it's really easy to shift to this place of the human is wrong, or like the ego is wrong, the protective personality is wrong, or just like this body experience is not enough. And I just want to challenge that, because you are embodied. We are embodied to experience on a human level. And any resistance or rejection of the human being, who you are in any moment, how you think in any moment, that rejection is the same as the rejection that we see in our culture of the rejection of the natural world. Our humanness is part of this earth, and it should be honored and part of the consciousness conversation and not rejected. So I think to hold both, and I'm not saying that you're speaking against that, but I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that value of awareness is embodied, and it is expansive and connected and doesn't reject.
No, that's beautiful. I have no problem with that at all. So I'm going to ask people to ask your question or make your comment. Who would like to start?
I'm Martine, and I'm curious about if there's a way that you can know if the animals are consciously aware of your communications with them. Because I imagine when you're tuning into humans, they're probably not consciously aware that you're talking to their subconscious or whatever part you're tuning into.
Good. And we're going to harvest a number. Did you have a question? No. Great.
Is your conversation usually verbal or nonverbal?
Okay, those are two good questions to start with. Go ahead.
Well, for the technology piece, yeah, I think we're in this time and on this planet right now. In my belief cosmology, we chose to be here at this time, and I think we should have discernment around what we engage with and how our bodies feel and how our hearts and minds feel through that interaction. But whatever comes up for you in your relationship with technology, I think is the most important thing to observe and work with, rather than technology itself. Okay.
And the other question?
So then, Martine, you asked about if the animals are aware.
Yeah, or if there's a way to know if they are.
I believe they're aware. I mean, one of the ways that I know is that during conversation, if the human asks for the animal to perform a certain task, and then the next day they do it, they're aware. The way that I connect, I see them in my mind communicating back to me. So I believe that's awareness. I guess it depends on what your awareness is. Some animals fall asleep. Some animals look out the window. So I don't think looking at a particular behavior, like a physical behavior, is going to tell you. But more often than not, there's a shift in the animal after the conversation, and that to me indicates awareness. And the verbal versus nonverbal, do you mean during session?
Yes.
So I describe and say everything that I'm showing the animal and what the animal shows me. So in that, I'm being verbal. Sometimes I'll use a word or a phrase if it's necessary, or if the animal knows, but mostly it's sending images and sensations and receiving images and sensations. It's what I think of as the universal language, rather than through the voice.
Any final questions? We're going to do a close. Yes.
Did I mishear you at the beginning when you mentioned phone? Do you do this over the phone?
Yes. Because energy is everywhere and because consciousness is everywhere, distance or proximity doesn't matter, because I'm connecting. It's essentially my consciousness connecting to the animal's consciousness. The time and space doesn't exist in that. So I have clients in China and France and in South America and Africa, so I don't have to go there. I like going to the in-person ones. I like meeting people in person. And that's why I'm here, to talk to Michael, and then I'm going to go meet a couple of horses and teach a class. So I like doing it that way, but it's just my preference. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any last thoughts or reflections?
So I'm curious, with when you talk to animals and they talk about past lives and stuff like that, do they build any kind of coherent spiritual model of the way the world works or death and stuff like that?
Yes. My focus and the way that I work with my practice is mostly with the competitive hunter jumper rider. So the spiritual aspects, my clients are not necessarily interested in that. They want results. And I can weave them in, but the focus of the conversation is typically the mechanics. So when horses pass away, there is more opportunity for that to happen. It's more covert with the ones, so it's like the animal communication becomes a vehicle for consciousness, for people to like open up and see how their interaction affects the animal and how the animal is affecting them. And I can again get a little bit of that conversation in, but my practice is like geared towards the professional. Yeah.
Yes. Can we move the mic? No, here.
That was me? Oh,
No.
I'm sorry.
I'm just, Gabrielle, I'm just wondering about your connection with animals that live in the wild.
Yeah. So everything is talking all of the time. Everybody, everything. All of you have images and sensations you're sending. We're all connected because we're in this conversation. I don't open myself up when I'm walking around. I think that would be very overwhelming for my mind. I'm an introvert. I don't necessarily want to see or hear all of that. But with the natural world, you can reach out to, like, 2 weekends ago, I was in Bend, Oregon, and I saw 3 wild animals while I was there. The first was a fox, and I reached out to a coyote. I reached out to the coyote, and he gave me like a, hi, like, this is weird, don't talk to me, and he ran off. He just ran off, and I was like, well. The second one was an eagle who was fishing, and I reached out, completely ignored me. He's fishing. He's trying to get his food. I get it. And then the last one was a deer. We were walking on a trail, and she was down at a bank, and she looked right at us, and I said, hi, beautiful. And she looked at me, and she said, are you hunters? And I went, no, you're safe with us. But with animals, we cultivate that, like, connection, the time of it, the focus of it, right? We're constantly training them to focus on us. And with the natural world, you know, they care or don't care. Yeah.
I'd like to address
the question that you had. Is that all right?
Yeah.
I'm also an animal communicator, and my practice is different than yours. My experience with animals of many species has been that they are keenly spiritually aware and offer lessons for us, specific guidance for their people and for me, letting us know how we're doing spiritually. Thank you.
Could you just say a word about your practice? How do you practice?
I actually conduct most of my sessions alone at my computer, working from a photograph, because I get mostly words. I'm a very verbal person. And so when I open to an animal, they begin talking rapidly in words. And so I have to type it all out very quickly. And so if I'm doing it in person, then there are environmental elements, and the person has a question, and I don't want to say stop talking because I'm still listening to the animal. The focus of most of my work is helping people understand why their horse is kicking out the board in the stall, or why the cat keeps on peeing in their bed. And more non-functional, mostly let's get along better kind of issues, and a lot of spiritual development issues too for both the people, because the animals are already there.
Thank you. Is there a community or association of animal communicators?
I don't know.
The International Association of Animal Communicators.
So there is Penelope Smith wrote out a code of ethics that many animal communicators use. And there are some summits online that you can, but I don't.
But it's a field.
It's a field,
Yeah. Well, Joanna, any last reflections for us? I've loved this conversation. It's felt very precious, and I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful.
I really appreciate
And
it.
thank you all for being with us for this wonderful New School conversation. It's been a great joy. Come back and stay in touch. And by the way, we welcome your support and contributions, and we will very gratefully receive it, because it costs money to do these things. So we're very grateful. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you.
Don't take it, don't take it, don't take it, don't take it, don't.